Expo 2021. I'm Pastor Frederick Boyd, pastor of Zion Unity Baptist Church, and the Senior Executive Director of the Creation of this Expo. And from my mouth to your hearts, welcome. Thank you for coming and being a part of this special night. Tonight is Carl Kelly night here at the Expo to remember one of our outstanding presenters for this ministry. We sure miss Carl, but the sad commentary is he don't miss us. He's with the Lord, where one day we'll all be this in Christ. So we're going to remember Carl Kelly tonight in this service. Good to have some of the family here. I saw Sister Nita walk in, and she's coming in now. And so we're going to get started tonight. It was just a night of celebration. And thank God for life. He was such a trooper for the Lord. And we loved him. And one day we'll see him again. Praise God. It may be very emotional tonight because when you have someone real close to you for 13 years and you start talking about him, if I get a little emotional, I just bring me a few tissues so I can dry out that. So our senior coordinator who runs this ministry is Pastor Richard Reynolds. He's the one that runs the Indianapolis event. So if you enjoy what's going on this year, praise God. Give him a hand, and then hand will trickle back to me. But if you don't like what is going on this week, then give him a hand. Don't just pray for me, because if we don't do well, then I catch it. If we do well, then I get some good praise. So, but no, Pastor Richard's been doing this this is the 16th year of running this, and so he does a great job. And I'm glad to see so many newcomers. We've got quite a few newcomers here tonight. And that's good. Some people from Grace and Muncie. So Pastor Richard will have an opening word, and then we're going to do the names of God. We first thing up, and then we'll have a special song. Pastor Richard.
It is a privilege to be here and present your truth. Mike? There's one. Thank you. All right, it's good to be here to present truth to folks that care to hear. And we're glad you're here. We're excited about tonight's presentations. Our both presentations are going to be tremendous. I know, prayed over and studied, and it's going to be full of content. And I too want to give a word. We will later. Brother Carl Kelly was a friend to all of us at the Expo. He was a true friend and a comrade in arms, so to speak, and just a blessing to be with. We were very, very sorry when he went to be with the Lord. We're not sorry for him, we're sorry for ourselves. As Pastor said, he's in glory. We're rejoicing for him, but hopefully in a few minutes after the first presentation, we'll do an honor to Carl Kelly. This is Carl Kelly night at the 2021 Expo. We're calling this Carl Kelly night. So thank you for being here. We are going to get started with the names of God, as we have for years. That has been our thing to do. And we're going to first see that, and then we'll introduce our singer for tonight.
Check this out.
Elohim, the supreme God. El-Olam, the everlasting God. Elohim Emet, the God of truth. El Shaddai, God Almighty. El HaKavod, the God of glory. El HaKadosh, the Holy God. El Tzaddik, the righteous God. Elohim Chayim, the living God. Yehovah Chatov, the good Lord. Emmanuel, God with us. Amen. I am.
In the beginning.
There is evidence.
There is evidence.
There is
scientific evidence.
deception exposed.
Amen. And that's really the message of this ministry. I am is the one that created everything. He's the creator, he's a sustainer, he's our savior. He did it. There is evidence, scientific evidence that proves God did it. Amen. And let me say this for Pastor Richard introducing our first person to bless us tonight. Genesis, saints, is the foundation of the Christian faith. Do I have a witness in the house? And if you ain't standing on Genesis, you ain't standing on nothing but sand. Matthew chapter 7 says, if you stand on sand, guess what? The wind and the waves going to wash your foundation away. But if you're standing on Genesis, you're standing on the rock. The winds and the rains descend. Guess what? They'll stand because you're on the rock. We got 3 million people of faith walking away every year because they don't have a foundation. They don't understand how important Genesis is to the Christian faith. That's what this is all about, to help you to know you got a real foundation with the Creator. Amen. If y'all believe in amen, you can say amen. All right, Pastor Richard.
If you were here last night, you heard a tremendous 2 lectures on what we call the woke society, woke culture, and how that very foundation he's talking about is the antidote to that nonsense. And if you missed last night, you flat missed a great, great night. And sorry you weren't here, but tonight is going to be great as well. Rick Oliveira has been with our ministry for some time. He is responsible for our international ministry. He has been responsible for us going into 5 countries. Panama and Colombia, South America, Dominican Republic. We don't know what all, but Rick Oliveira is very, very instrumental in our international ministry. And his son is local here, and he has been given by God a great talent to present God's message in song. And so please welcome John Oliveira tonight, who's going to bless us with a song.
Here, glad that we're all here. The group couldn't come this week or this year because of good old COVID. COVID messes everything up, doesn't it? So we're just going to pray that God does something different next year, and we'll be able to all be here together. So pray this is a blessing to you. There is still a God out there, amen.
Climb up on a horse, let it run full speed. Take a look at the world from 30,000 feet on your next flight. Watch a flock of birds against the morning sun. Close your eyes and listen to the river run. Get your raindrop on your tongue, raindrop on your tongue, that's the run. There is a God. There is a God. Oh, there is a God. How much proof do you need? Plant a seed and see what comes out of the ground. Find a baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound. Wait a few years later, hear him laughing. Don't it sound like a song? Stop and think about what you don't understand. again. Hear the doctors say you can't explain it, but the cancer's gone. There is a God. There is a God. Oh, there is a God. How much proof do you need? Science says it's all just circumstance, like the whole world's a big old accident. If you want to shoot that theory down, just look around. Oh, look around. There is a God. There is a God. Aren't you glad? There is a God. How much proof do we need? Oh, there is a God. Yes, there is a God. Oh, there is a God. How much proof do we need?
There is evidence. There is a God. Our first presenter tonight has been with us, I think, 4 years now. And he was introduced to this ministry through Bruce Malone. Is that right, Bruce? Daniel Currier? Well, I don't know. Anyhow, he reached out, he came and auditioned with us, and we liked his message. And so he's part of the team now 4 years. His wife is somewhere around there. She is Sister Tori with the babe. And he's a professor up in the Peoria area. And so he's going to come as part of the team. We're so grateful for Mr. Daniel Curry, for his wife Tori, and the baby. I don't know what the baby's name again is. Gavin. Oh, well, I think the governor of California is Gavin too. But anyhow, he's going to come and share with us the first lecture of the night. And then after this, we're going to have a song and a special tribute to remember Carl Campbell. All right. Come on, Mr. Daniel. You got it. God bless you tonight. Let's enjoy it, folks. I'm glad y'all are here. Amen.
All right. Plastic people, I'll get into that in a second here, but before I get into that, when Dr. Boyd called me about this event this weekend, he told me that he received an honorary doctor's degree, right? Dr. Boyd? So let's give him a round of applause for that. One thing that's really cool about working with now Dr. Boyd is that whenever you work with him, he's always bragging you up more than what you really are. In fact, as a speaker here, I just received my PhD. So that's really cool. The way it's going, if I stay here for another 5-10 years, I'm like 5 PhDs and 10 master's degrees. But I do back up, I do have a PhD. If I'm not. All right. In the 1940s, there was this comic strip called Plastic Man. Have anybody ever heard of Plastic Man before? He would change shapes and stuff like that to fight crime and all that good stuff. But when we in our society think of plastic, what comes to mind? Fake, cheap, man-made, right? Those types of things, throwaway. I'm kind of using that word in that same type of context. with plastic people, where people in our society today are man-made, moldable, cheap, that type of idea. To back up, I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, and I'm going to ask you a question to give you some feedback here. First question is, I just want you to think about this for a second. What makes us human? What makes us human? So the question I want you to answer is, what makes us different from animals? Anyone? Image of God? Loud. Spirit? Communication, yeah, speech. Inventiveness, yeah. Technology and stuff like that. Now, here's a question that you maybe have never thought about before, or no one ever asked you. I don't know. What makes us different from angels? We have bodies, right? We're physical bodies. We're physically human bodies. And that's one area that we're majorly different than angels. Most of us, and kind of switching that a little bit here, most of us, when we think about, like, let's say plastic surgery, we think about plastic surgery in the sense that we want to go get maybe something fixed to make us look more human. Maybe even for myself, like I had my teeth fixed, which is not really plastic surgery, but it kind of is. I had my teeth fixed. Let's say someone has cuff plates, or spina bifida, or overbite, or someone has some prosthetics, or maybe even removing scar tissue. We're trying to look more human. One of the things in society that's been bugging me for the last few years is this extreme body modification. And this is one of the topics tonight, so this is just kind of an introduction here. Extreme body modification. These people have spent thousands of dollars and many surgeries to look like Barbie and Ken. Now, besides being a waste of money and maybe a waste of time and a waste of self-focus, I'm wondering if they are elevating their personal autonomy above God's design, their personal glory above God's glory. Now, at this level, it looks pretty simple, like, okay, whatever, it's not a big deal. And the next one is just a little bit worse, but maybe not that bad. This next one is people who are trying to look like elves. Now, some of these people have had surgery to make their ears look pointy. Some of these just have little ears that they stuck on. But they identify, at least one of the girls in here identifies as an elf, which is kind of strange. And she's had surgery for her ears to look pointy, the middle one up there. Her ears are surgically created to look pointy. Now, this is kind of weird, but it gets even more freaky. It seems like people are using this extreme body modification to look like maybe monsters or evil monsters, and that's what kind of freaks me out. How about some of these pictures? Why would you do that? Isn't that crazy? And then it gets even worse. There's one guy up here, he had his nose cut off and his ears cut off. They implant the horns and little nubs in their head and stuff like that. Just really strange stuff going on. Plastic surgery, mass tattooing, piercing, and studs seem to be moving us away from God's design in these people's lives. It seems that I identify as is taking precedence over normalizing our body towards God's design. Are we trying to use our body to glorify God or to glorify ourselves? Get attention or whatever. Now this lady is on TikTok. She identifies as a bug. That's her pronoun. So she wants people to call her bug. So personal pronoun. Really strange. Okay, kind of a big overview of what we'll be doing tonight. We already talked about extreme body modification. We'll be looking at this a little more, especially when we get into transgenderism. We'll be talking about LGBTQ, rejecting the human body design that God created. We'll be talking about the radical green movement that has denigrated human beings, that we are of very low value. We'll be looking at some of the Marxism and things that has spawned, such as communism, progressivism, Nazism, fascism, stuff like that has wrecked human beings. And right along with that, we'll be looking at woke ideology, right along with last night, because that too is very anti-human. And then the culture of death, which would be including things like abortion, things like that. I will just be focusing on abortion just for the sake of time tonight. But all of these denigrate humanity, God's design on human function. There's three underlying principles that I want you to kind of know as we go along here that are very, very important as we talk about these topics. And these will help guide us through these different main items that we were just discussing earlier. In early 2000s, I took a class in technology. I have a technology background besides biology, and the class was on robotics. One of the movies I was supposed to watch in this was, when we discussed it, was The Bicentennial Man. Has anyone seen this movie? Okay, so interestingly enough, the star is Robert Williams. He's a robot, and he's AI, and it so happens that it's almost at the human level. And besides, minus all the thought of the story, there's a few key points that I want to point out. He always wanted to look like a real human being. So physically, he looked like a robot, but he always wanted to look like a real human being. So he had different designers through the years create his body to look more and more human. So, but the real self, though, was his AI. His real self was his computer program, if you want to think of it that way. As new body designers came and went, as years went by, he got new body parts and looked more and more human. So his body was kind of moldable. The second thing I want to kind of point out is that at the very end of the movie, if you didn't want the spoiler, but it is, he wants to be fully human, and to be fully human is to actually be mortal, to die, to ultimately die. So he had some sort of chemical injected into his artificial body that eventually would kill him, make him a mortal being. So death was part of being human. I'm going to kind of hit at some of those issues throughout this talk, especially near the end when we hit the Christian response, the biblical response, Jesus' response to the ideas of plastic people. To start out, though, I'm going to talk about a concept that Francis Schaeffer, Nancy Pearcey, and many others have talked about: the upper story and the lower story view of truth. A lot of times in philosophy, people call it the fact-value split. It's a split between postmodernism and modernism. A split between the Enlightenment and the split between Romantic eras. So the upper story of truth would include the private, subjective, relativistic, morality, theology. These are things that you have in your mind you can't touch. The lower story includes the public, the scientific, the objective, things you can touch and feel, things that are testable. Modernists claim that the lower story is the primary or sole reality, the facts and science. The postmodernists, however, are saying, wait, the upper story is reality, and that the facts and science are just mental constructs. Nancy Pearcey says this: the key to understanding all the controversial issues of our day is that the concept of the human being has likewise been fragmented into the upper and lower stories. This concept I just gave you might be kind of complex, but it helps us understand the deeply dehumanizing view of our culture today. The promotion of abortion, homosexuality, assisted suicide, transgenderism, the free sex, the sexual chaos that's going on in our day and age. She goes on to say, secular thought today assumes a body-person split, with the body defined in the fact realm by empirical science, lower story, and the person defined in the values realm as the basis for rights, the upper story. This is a very fractured, fragmented view of humanity. It devalues the body of the person. The second principle I'm going to talk about the upper story, lower story principle. The next principle that goes around with it is our culture's focus on feelings. Our culture's focus on feelings. Now, some of these things are not necessarily bad. Some of these are bad, some of these are not. God is our granddaddy for our pleasure. That's kind of how our culture thinks about God. He's just there for when I need him. Personal autonomy reigns supreme. How I feel is most important. You see these types of things in our culture a lot. Follow your heart, follow your truth, be true to yourself. How many of you have heard those phrases before? I hear them all the time. I want you to feel good, be happy, and have pleasure. That's very common. I have a friend who left Christ. I guess he's an atheist now. He doesn't really want to talk to me, I guess. I don't know. But I talked to him for an hour or two, and he was telling me that he wanted to leave Christ because he wanted to be happy. I'm like, okay, that's strange. God, I guess, cramped his life, maybe. I don't know. He also raised the objection, like, why would a good God who knew everything create humans that he knew would experience pain, evil, and suffering? And I asked him this, like, well, you just told me a few minutes ago, which he did, that he wanted eventually to get married, have a family, and have kids. I was like, so you were criticizing God for creating humans that are going to go through pain, evil, and suffering, but you want to have kids, and you know those kids are going to go through pain, evil, and suffering. Right? He had no answer to that. He had really no good answer for that. We live in a broken world. That's the reason why we have pain, evil, and suffering. Focus on empathy. Empathy is a good thing, but we can't stay at empathy. Empathy is a big phrase in our culture today. Good, but it's just step one. We need to go deeper than that. We focus on painless births, painless lives, painless deaths. I like that. That's not a bad thing. It's just that that's our culture. We don't want pain. We have a cancel culture. You offend me, so I'm going to cancel you. Divorce because I don't feel the love anymore. Love is just a feeling. Love is just a feeling. No, love is not just a feeling. That's just one aspect of it. So, since everything's just based on feelings, and since some unborn babies don't have feelings, they can't feel pain yet, then they must not be human. Have you ever thought that before? That's one of the arguments that people give, which is really strange. Because that feelings doesn't make you human necessarily. Besides, Darwinism is the third item I want to really hit home in this discussion tonight. Darwinism, or Darwin taught that all life came from a universal common ancestor. He also said life was all related. And if all life is related on planet Earth, humans aren't really special. Look at this tree of life. We're just one of the many creatures that came out from our single-celled ancestor millions of years ago. Thus, human is devalued with the same level as any other creature on planet Earth. If there is no God, materialism is true, and so he embraces materialism because he does not think that God exists. Nature designed our body, thus we're just part of nature. If there's no gods, if there is no God, then there's no God's moral will. So the only entity that should be making decisions about us would be us. We can impose our will on our body. The body's a clump of matter to be manipulated, and evolution is helped along with eugenics, which we heard about. I think we heard a little bit about that last night, along with abortion and body modification. Yes, we do have animal-like characteristics, such as biological, sexual, physical. We eat food, all those types of things. We will also have other characteristics as well. We have a rationality and other topics that we just talked about earlier. God created us with a mind, body, and soul. We were together. This is one entity. It's not a fracture, as today's culture seems to suggest. Back to Nancy Pearson here, we tend to think that materialism, which Darwinism embraces, is a philosophy that places high value on the material world because it claims that matter is all that exists. Yet ironically, in reality, it places a low value on the material world as purely particles in motion with no higher purpose or meaning. All physical, so we might just live it up. Body obsession isn't, when people focus on the body, remember those previous slides? Body obsession today doesn't mean we accept it. Obsession, she says, with the body can reveal a mindset akin to that of a luxury car owner polishing and tuning up an expensive automobile. To focus on young plastic bodies is a mindset that shows hatred towards the real body. And you can see this in today's culture with people who are so focused on things that are actually not bad, like exercising, dieting. Those things are good. Have good diets, body building is fine. But people are focused on anti-aging. You don't want to age, you want to have plastic surgery, Botox. We're very focused on our body to make our bodies look young and young and beautiful, which is not a bad thing. It's just when we take it to the extreme, there's some concern with that. Now, that's that. That's with the whole item of materialistic thought. Now, going back to Darwin's view of everyone being the same level, dehumanizing humans, putting us at the same level as the rest of organisms on Earth. When I first saw these two memes online, I thought they were done by the Babbling Bee. They were not. These are real memes from PETA. These infographics tell us that we should show social justice to animals, and we should not show speciesism. So instead of saying to kill two birds with one stone, you should be using to feed two birds with one stone. Instead of beating a dead horse, feed a fed horse. Or on this other side, it also had this. Instead of using chicken, calling someone a chicken, say that they're coward, or instead of pig, call them repulsive. Because why? Why? Because it's speciesists. Because you're elevating your own species above these other animals. This is concerning. It de-elevates humans. It devalues humans when they say stuff like this. Wesley J. Smith, who's a bioethicist, he says this kind of folly is entirely predictable when nature becomes an objective of quasi-worship. It is what happens when humans so degrade the worth of their own species that they consider themselves to be merely another aspect of the natural world, neither more or less important than any other fauna and flora. Humans are no longer exceptional. The next few slides are coming from a video that's titled, you find it on YouTube. It's titled Darwin's Impact on Society in under 3 minutes. I have some screenshots of it, so I'm giving reference to that video, so if you want to watch the whole thing, feel free. Darwin, some quotes from different famous people. Darwin, there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. As zoologists, humans are no better than bacteria. And geneticists, a worm represents a human. Another geneticist, in essence, we are nothing but a big fly. Guy who wrote Green Range, he said this: Darwin invited humanity to face the fact nature has revealed not one scrap of evidence that humankind is superior or special. You're not special. That's what he's saying. Infamous or famous, or however you want to look at Peter Singer, one of his most infamous quotes is that the life of a newborn baby is less valued than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee. That's crazy. He also went on to say, Darwin's theory undermined the foundations of the entire Western way of thinking about the place of our species in the universe. And Darwinism does do that, very much so. All right, so those three things, the fact-value split, or the upper story, lower story, Darwinism, and our focus, our culture's focus on humans, kind of underlie the ideas that underlie the rest of this talk. So with those ideas, we'll be hitting some of these big issues that are in our culture today. The first one is the LGBTQ movement, the family breakdown, the rise of homosexuality, and the rise of transgenderism, which is also going to consider extreme body modification at times. Dennis Prager once said in one of his talks that the two videos, the PragerU videos that he gets the most hate for, are the ones where he makes a case for God and for the family. That is really strange. The videos that he makes a case for God and the family. During the past 40 years, we've seen a massive decline in the family. The rise of divorce or remarriage, the rise of shacking up. A Christian friend of mine told me that he tells his kids that they should shack up with their partner for a year before they get married to see if they're compatible with each other. I'm like, what? Yeah. You call yourself a Christian? Yeah. Did you ever read the Bible?
Amen.
So you see what happens when there's a family breakdown. It causes a lot of harm to society, to the kids. No, sin is not a private thing. Sin affects everyone. It affects society especially, and our kids. Thus, we see one of the aspects of this family breakdown. We have seen the lack of sexual morals. We've seen the rise of other immoral sexual activities such as LGBTQ and the normalization of that acceptance. And now we're not just supposed to accept it, but we're supposed to promote it and celebrate such activity. If you don't, you're a hater. However, God created us as males and females with counterparts. Eyes are for what? Ears are for? Wings are for? Feet are for, yeah, God created us with a specific form that has a specific function. And when we say no to God's design, we are ignoring God's signposts to say these items or these things are for specific functions. We're saying, no, I know better. I know something that I don't want God to tell me what this is for. Homosexuality actually ignores God's design and it places the upper story in a higher category than the lower story. It just divides human being into two categories, upper story, lower story. It says, oh, how you feel is more important than what your body is, how God created you. These are three famous people, well-known people in culture. First one is, the first two are actually males, and the last one is actually a female. The first two, they feel like they're female, so they feel like they're female trapped in a male body. The last one is a female who thinks that she is trapped in a female body, but she believes that she's male, except for the fact she just had a baby, I think a few years ago. There's another one too, and not the second picture, but another girl who had a baby who looks like a guy. That one was a Tristan Lees or something like that. Very similar to the last picture there. You see, transgenderism is extreme body modification. It is extreme body modification. And where we elevate the mind or the feelings above the physical body. Now, think of other situations in life where this happens. We are concerned about those people when they do that. For example, this girl here, her name is Emily Hewitt. This picture was taken in 2018. She has anorexia. And she says anorexia is body dysmorphia, messes up your perception of yourself. The trouble is eating disorders warp your sense of normal. Food was bad, they were making me fat. She does not look healthy in here. She did not know it. She did not know it. Your mind can be wrong. And we're broken human beings. It usually is. That's why we have to align our thoughts, our mind to Christ's mind. Amen. Now, one of the most concerning things, I'm concerned about adults doing this, but one thing that's even more concerning is when adults have children do this. This boy's name is James. There's the back of his dad right there. That's James right there. His mom, I think his dad and mom are separated, but his mom is trying to transition him to be a girl. James Junger's mother is, I think, some sort of doctor, so she dresses in dresses and trying to transition him with chemical castration, sterilization, sex change surgery. And because his dad does not want him to go through this all, his dad has lost custody because he's not willing to help pay for these surgeries. So if you do want to donate, this is a great time. Go to Give, Send, Go. By the way, it's a good time to recommend Give, Send, and Go as a donation site. So if you need money, or you need to donate money, or have someone who needs money, go to Give, Send, Go. Stop going to GoFundMe. GoFundMe is a more leftist organization, it seems like. They keep kicking Christians off. And for Christian ethical purposes, they keep kicking them off. So go Give, Send, Go. You can find St. James there and help them out. But this is really sick. This is really sick. Yeah. I would put this in the category of child abuse, maybe? I'd say. Now, I have a question for you. Who said this? Okay, Renee, who said this? The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I like to be. It would make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination. Joseph Biden, yes. Yeah, that's really concerning.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
All right. Next topic. The rise of green. The rise of green. The culture that we're living in is promoting this green culture, which is not necessarily bad. I mean, I want energy efficiency. I do not want to hurt the earth. I want to take care of the earth because we're called to be stewards of the earth. Not a big deal, except for the fact that today's day and age is not just taking care of the earth that God gave us, it's that humans are bad. Question for you: has anybody ever seen any of these pictures before? The top two pictures are from Florida. They're a place, a site that's called Coral Castle. Coral Castle. Some guy in the mid-1900s, he built it all himself. We do not know for sure how he did it. I'm sure there's YouTube videos that try to explain it, but as far as I know, we don't know for sure how he built this all himself without any big earth-moving equipment. Somehow, he moved these stones in their place. He said he figured out how the ancients moved stones, but I don't know. That's a mystery of our life, this monstrous mystery. How about these megalithic stones down in South America? Has anyone ever seen those before? There's all sorts of megalithic stones down in South America. It's crazy how they get there, who put them there, who made them. Or how about this one, the pyramids out in Mesoamerica, the Central America. Those are monstrous structures. Or how about Coquille Mounds down in St. Louis? Has anyone been down to St. Louis to Coquille Mounds? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's really close to here. I think in Ohio there might be some. I think there's another site in Illinois too that has some mounds, but this is the largest mounds, the Indian mounds. We don't know for sure why all this stuff's here or how it came to be. Sometimes we know who, but we don't understand how they did it or why or whatever. One item that's really curious is a structure down in Georgia. Has anyone ever seen this structure before? The Georgia Guidestones, with the 10 Commandments to the Age of Reason. We don't know for sure who financed this. All we know is that the construction company who put this up was given a call and sent a check to say, do this, and they did it. So somebody who had tons and tons of money, or some organization, and we're assuming it's someone who's fairly, I don't know, this happened in the 1970s, somebody who's really rich and powerful, we assume. That's at least my assumption, but we don't know for sure. 10 commandments, 10 rules on here. I'll give you five most interesting ones for our purposes here. The first one, maintain humanity under 5 million people. We have billions of people on this planet. So what's going to have to happen? That's concerning. What do they want to do? That's weird. Guide reproduction wisely, improve fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Or a wormhole type of mindset. Let all nations rule eternally, resolve external disputes in a world court. Again, more of a worldwide, new world order type of idea. And the last one was interesting. Be not cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. How do you get rid of cancer? What's he talking about here? What are these people talking about? I don't know. It's kind of scary though. Someone who has lots of money and seems to have some power to get things done. But this is the concept, this is the mindset in today's day and age. Yeah. Nature is good, human impact is bad. Primitive peoples are romanticized, life-saving fossil fuels are bad. However, we forget they prevent hunger and nakedness and exposure. Humans are devalued in the green movement. But if you think about this devaluing, this is true human racism. This is truly racism against the human race. Because remember from last night, there was only how many races in the world? One race. We're all human. We're all human.
Amen.
Alex Epstein says this. We don't take a safe climate and make it dangerous. We take a dangerous climate and make it safe. No matter what, climate will always be naturally hazardous, and the key question will always be whether we have the adaptability to handle it or better yet, master it. Climate in our day and age, in the 21st century, is not dangerous because we use fossil fuels. Climate is dangerous because we don't use fossil fuels. There's so many people living in poverty and sickness in other third world countries who do not have access to cheap, clean energy. 2020, independence says, how long just save the planet from climate catastrophe? The clock is ticking. 7 years, so we only have 6 years left. Al Gore, famous Al Gore. I'll let you read that one. Everyone knows Al Gore and what he thinks. The world's falling apart. We're into a period of consequences. The Guardian, 2018, says we have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe. 12 years. That was in 2018, so it was 3 years later. Yeah. Interestingly enough, Alex Epstein also said this: when you hear scary claims about a climate crisis, keep in mind that catastrophists have been claiming climate crises for 40 years. For example, Obama's science advisor, Jerome Holdren, predicted in the 1980s that we'd have up to 1 billion climate deaths today. This is false. It never happened.
Amen.
The experts are almost always focus on the risks, not the benefits, and guess what? If the story bleeds, it leads. Bigger the prediction, more pain, evil, suffering, it'll lead people like to read it. It is more views. When we look at the recent past, that was supposed to be so disastrous, we should look at flourishing, and that of course includes the quality or lack thereof of our environments. We need to understand that cheap, reliable energy can also fuel save lives, just like nuclear, stuff like that. But those who are green oppose it, but these things are actually saving people's lives. Think about this, or stop and think about this for a second. Food. Who grows your food? Unless you grow it at home. Farmers. What do they use? They use tractors. What do tractors use? Diesel. Diesel is fossil fuel. You don't have your food on your table without fossil fuel. Not counting the technology and all the energy that are required to make the tractors and all that stuff. Hospitals use technology. Plastics are all used all around us. Plastics are used in hospitals. Without plastics, the hospitals would not be as high tech as we have today. All these things that we have for energy, for all these things that we have in our day and age, we have to thank fossil fuels for. And to invent as some sort of evil thing is kind of concerning. Even our indoor climate control, would you like to be sweating right now with all fans, or do you actually enjoy that climate control? I enjoy the climate control. Name one animal that can use fire like humans. Fossil fuels, we use it to create fires like coal and oil. Combustion engines, we got here with combustion engines, everything in this room. Think about what's around you, all around you. Can you find one thing in this room that was created without the use of fire? We as humans have a unique ability to not only use fire, but we also have a unique ability to actually harvest fossil fuels for nuclear and other things for our use. Interestingly, when I was growing up, my mom would cut our hair, and my younger brother, when she cut his hair when he was a little boy, he was kind of active and he didn't want to sit there to get his hair cut. So she would light a fire to mesmerize him so that she could cut his hair, just at least for a few minutes there. But fire does mesmerize us, it brings us together, and we're unique among all the organisms on Earth that actually use fire. Just exciting. All right, so I'd rather have clean heat, temperature control, quick transportation, better healthcare, indoor plumbing, cheap, plentiful energy, refrigeration, and rich food, advanced technology, instead of all the other stuff on this other side here. I actually enjoy our technology. I actually enjoy our advancement, pro-human advancement. So if we have the capability to save life like this, I would argue it would be immoral, it would be racist to get rid of this cheap, plentiful energy. Criminalizing extracting from, this is Wesley J. Smith again, criminalizing extracting oil from tar sands would chill large-scale energy production everywhere in the world, which would result in terrible harm to humans, including wild inflation and the cost of heating our homes and transportation and food market. If you thought the economic shutdown of 2020 was bad, getting rid of oil would make it really times worse.
Yeah.
Epstein also says this: to me, the question of what to do about fossil fuels comes down to this: what will promote human life? What will promote human flourishing? Realizing the full potential of life, how do we maximize the years of our life and the life of our years? Very powerful statement there. And lastly here, he says this: as we have used more fossil fuels, our resource situation, our environmental situation, our climate situation have been improving too. More fossil fuels, more resources, better environment, and safer climate. This is what's actually happening against the grain of today's society. But again, we get people like AOC who want to push a Green New Deal. She said this, and I think it's 2018 and 10 years left to implement the Green New Deal before cataclysmic climate disaster. So I guess we only have, 7 years, something like that. This guy here, Justin Haskins, he says this: the Green New Deal has been hailed as one of the most important proposals to tackle global warming in decades, but don't be fooled, it will absolutely do nothing to reduce global temperature or prevent future temperature rise. The real outcome of the Green Movement is something else, as socialistic programs and to grow the government. Wesley J. Smith agrees and dig deeper into ecocide advocacy, and the typical anti-free market ideology that drives too much of the environmentalism today comes clearly into focus. And thus we see CNN posting things like this week actually. CNN, we don't have any more time. They say for decades, scientists have warned of extreme weather. It would be more extreme if climate change has appeared with limited analysis. Biden, he goes on, luckily Biden does have a plan. His plan is to throw more money at it. More money at it, trillions and trillions of dollars. Bigger governments, more socialistic programs, things like that. Which leads me right to the next topic of socialism. Marxism, communism, Nazism, fascism, and yes, even woke ideology. I found this quote by this Twitter personality to be very true, if you think about it. I'm sorry, my bad. He says this: real socialism has never been tried in the same way that real capitalism has never been tried. The difference is almost socialism resulted in the impoverishment and death of hundreds of millions of people, while almost capitalism has lifted billions from absolute poverty, and this is so true. Look at these numbers here. These are just estimates. The numbers could be way higher than this. And by the way, yes, Nazism and fascism are socialistic political systems. If you actually read the literature. China, 65 million people probably died. That might be a low number, we don't know for sure. Soviet Union, 46 million. Again, I've seen different numbers from different sources. Fascism and Nazism, probably at least 20 million, maybe more. Cambodia, 2 million. These are just some of the numbers. There's many other socialistic, Marxistic countries, fascistic countries that have killed even more people than even what I have here. And then this rises, so we move from socialism and Marxism to the next socialism, and that's called identity socialism, also called woke or things like that in our culture. Marxism and Nazism, I would argue, have grown into a monster with these crazy appendages. It's no longer just economic disparities. It's no longer just in the fascist world or the Nazi world, differences in like ethnic backgrounds or races. But now wokeism is now focused on other disparities too: sex, gender, incomes, age, race, power, ability, etc., etc. It keeps going on and on. Every disparity, every difference in people's lives, or different segments of people's lives, are being pitted against each other. We will focus on disparities in power and privilege. Social justice is a term. It's not true justice, not biblical justice, just FYI. If you want to talk later about, let's go back to the biblical justice, which is where we should go back to the Bible to look for a justice, not to some Marxist thinker like D'Angelo or Kennedy or something like that. Which I've read. All disparities are racist and need for redistribution. So this is the end result. If you read Kennedy, which I'll be pointing out a little later, Kennedy argues that pretty much capitalism is racist and racism is capitalism. And to get rid of capitalism is actually bringing in Marxism or some sort of socialist policy, which would help decrease racism. Okay, so this next thing is, I'm not sure if anybody's ever seen this one before. Has anybody ever seen this infographic? This made its rounds online maybe about a year ago, and it's a lot longer than this. That's just one slide. That's just one part of it. So the National Museum of African American History and Culture from the Smithsonian Institute Museum, they put out this infographic. And they talk about aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. Now, if you go to the BLM website, the BLM organization website, it talks about the difference between a white culture and black culture. And it's not necessarily talking about always about being dark skinned or light skinned, even though it kind of assumes that. It's kind of fluffy and flaky, kind of depends on what you kind of mean by stuff. But a lot of times when they say white culture, they say people with a European descent. So the opposite of that is someone from a black culture, which means that if you are from a European descent, you believe this, which I assume that the opposite of this would be black culture. I think it's dehumanizing to those from African descent, just my opinion. If someone says this is, white people are the opposite of this, I'll be like, whoa, what does that mean? For example, rugged individualism, like what? So if you're rugged individualism or have this idea of rugged individualism, you are from white culture. You're not black culture is the opposite of this. How about this? The nuclear family is a white culture. So if you have a nuclear family or promote nuclear family, you're promoting white culture. I think that's kind of meaning to those in African descent, myself. Objective, rational, linear thinking. Some of the most rational people I know are people of African descent. This is crazy. Like, why are we criticizing this? The opposite of that, hard work to keep to success. And these are just some of them. I'm just saying some highlights. Here's some more too. Christianity is a norm. This is crazy. Or how about this? Respect authority. Or have some sort of time schedule. Or how about holidays based on Christian religions? Or how about justice? More the biblical view of justice. The common law kind of comes up with the biblical view of justice. Or how about this? Competition. You must always do something about the situation. So if you don't think that you have to do something about the situation, I guess, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what to make of that. Or how about this one? Be polite. Dr. Board, you're one of the most polite people I know. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. If someone says this about me, I feel very offended and dehumanized. I think it's sad. That's my opinion. Racism. According to Kendi, this is Abraham X. Kendi. He wrote a book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And he's saying racist is not necessarily, he's not talking about racism necessarily, like how we usually view racism from the 1970s. He's talking about disparities. Any type of disparities is considered racism, I guess, at this point. At least that's how I read it. If you have some more thoughts on that, feel free to talk to me afterwards or in Q&A. I'll be more than happy to learn more about this. I've read his book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And racism is rooted in the patriarchy and capitalism. Capitalism and racism are conjoined twins. To be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist. Capitalism is essentially racist, and racism is essentially capitalist. That's just crazy. Capitalism has brought millions and millions of people out, billions of people out of poverty.
Amen.
Socialism is opposite. And this is kind of where this discrimination thing is most bombastic quote of all, I think, is that the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy for present discrimination is future discrimination. I'm really concerned with him and Robin DiAngelo's. I personally think they are promoting actual, true racist ideas. It's really concerning me. It's dehumanizing. So pretty much what happens is it demoralizes people of European descent, and I think it dehumanizes people of African descent.
Amen.
So it's not helping. It makes wars, it's just not helpful. It divides humanity. It should not be. Culture of death. Abortion, suicide, eugenics. I cannot get into all these. I'll just hit abortion real quickly here. There's this organization called Christians Engaged. And no, Christians Engaged is not some sort of marital service or engagement service or dating or wedding organization. It's an organization, a political organization, where run by Christians promoting the Christian worldview for politics. Well, this year the IRS rejected, but then later accepted their tax-exempt status because Bible teachings are typically affiliated with the Republican Party and candidates? Wait. That doesn't make sense to me, isn't that? That's just concerning. And then the things that they said were things like, this is the quotes they pulled off of Christians Engaged websites, why they rejected them. Like, Christians Engaged argue for the definition of marriage, the biblical definition of marriage, biblical justice, law and lawlessness, freedom of speech, religious liberty, human trafficking, and sanctity of life. Why aren't those like all our views? It doesn't matter which party you are. This is concerning to me that we as a society have said, only one party, political party promotes this stuff. I don't understand this. Well, the opposite of sanctity of life is something called the quality of life debate. And the quality of life debate pretty much says that if you have certain aspects or certain functions, then that makes you a human being. Nancy Pearcey says it this way: just being biologically part of the human race, the lower story, is not morally relevant. Individuals must earn the status of personhood by meeting an additional set of criteria, the ability to make decisions, exercise self-awareness, and plan for the future. And so on the upper story. In other words, she's saying is that the quality of life people, she's a sanctity of life person, she's arguing for the sanctity of life. She's saying the quality of life people say that if you do not meet these criteria, you're not a human. If you do meet them, you are a human person. Non-person is just a body, a disposable piece of matter that can be just thrown away. That is why some think it's totally fine to kill the unborn and sell their body parts, because they're not a person. They're just a clump of cells. However, since Roe versus Wade from the 70s, 62 million babies have been murdered. And it was supposed to be the safest place on the planet Earth. Mother's Milk. Iceland cures Down syndrome by testing for people with Down syndrome, babies with Down syndrome, and if they have Down syndrome, then they abort them. This is really concerning. Smith goes on to say this: we live in an ironic age. Some people are being stripped of their personhood, while at the same time, the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees have been granted legal rights. And in his book, The War on Humans, which is a great book, if you ever get a chance to read it, do read it. He talks about this, how different countries are now granting the natural legal rights. That's really concerning. Going back to abortion, though, it's not new. A form of abortion would be child sacrifice. It happened in the Bible over 20 times. The Bible talks about certain people passing babies or passing their children through the fire. That means sacrificing their kids on an altar, on a burnt offering. In ancient times, babies were offered to the god of Moloch. Fire was kindled in a bull-like structure, a bull-like idol. It got really hot. Babies were set on the arms and pretty shy. But it's not just Moloch. It's not just the Middle East where this happened. Where life was disposable. We can see this around the globe, all through history and all through time, all different places throughout the world. We can see the history of people sacrificing other people to their gods. The Aztecs infamously sacrificed thousands and thousands of people on their pyramids to their gods. And then they cannibalized them too, which also included cannibals in the times when Columbus came to the New World. He meant the cannibals. If you want to read some of the primary sources, do read the primary sources. Don't read some of the pop culture things about Columbus, because you can't go back to the original sources. Nearby, interestingly, about these cannibals, and the cannibals and the Aztecs, they would farm out communities of people to sacrifice and to eat. They would have communities of people where they would pen up there specifically so they could eat them and sacrifice them to their gods. So why did the ancients sacrifice babies to Moloch? Well, they wanted to manipulate the gods to control their destinies. Our God today is self, and so killing unexpected or unplanned or disabled unborn babies is done to try to control our destinies. The same ideas, the same goal. All right, the final topic and the exciting topic, because this is the positive. This is the Christian view that is an answer to this anti-human world we live in. We are created in God's image. We were given as his viscerals, if you want to put it that way, as co-creators, as gardeners. We are here because he gave us his image. We have been given free will, language, and rationality. We have the ability to create, to design advanced designs. We have been given duties and morals and responsibilities. We have eternal souls. We appreciate, interestingly enough, we not only appreciate beauty, but we also make beauty. We appreciate beauty, but we also make beauty. We desire to know and learn about history and keep history. There's not one organism on planet Earth that cares about history. And interestingly enough, we intrinsically desire to worship and have a relationship with God, some God. But the Creator God is who we advocate everyone to. He is God, the Creator of all life. And we're designed to reflect God's glory and His desires on earth. We again are His gardeners. We are here to take care of His earth.
Amen.
Genesis. Let's go back to Genesis. This, again, biblical worldview answers these anti-human views of the world around us. The Bible says we're made in the image of God. We're created to have dominion over the earth. The total opposite answer that the secular world has. And we're made male and female. Each one of these items hit right at the heart of today's culture. We're formed from the dust of the ground. That means we're physical. And God breathed the breath of life into us, making us a spiritual being, or having a spiritual soul. Again, we're dualistic, extremely dualistic, and anti-dualistic in nature. And this will come up a little later, Genesis 2:17. The first people, Adam and Eve, ate of the forbidden fruit, caused death, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the loss of innocence. So in other words, we have an integrated physical body and soul. We're more than just brute beasts or just spirits, and we have dominion over the earth, and we're moral creatures. And we're broken and we're fallen, which we'll come back to in a minute or two here. Nancy Piercy says Christianity holds that there exists both body and soul, matter and spirit, and these two substances causally interact with one another, but neither can be reduced to the other. We're integrated unity, body, and embodied soul. This is really important. She goes on to say, everyone who is human is also a person, and the two cannot be separated. This view avoids a radical devaluation of the human life.
Amen.
So this is a very important point, okay? It's a very important point. Because the next point I'm going to make is this, along with this, is that when someone dies, which is really relevant because we'll be honest, someone who just passed away recently here, we are saddened. We're torn. So why are we so sad when someone dies? Why are funerals so sad? But at the same time, there seems to be a paradox or a tension there that we know that they have gone on to a better place, right? We have this tension. But innately, we know that there's something wrong. There's a splitting of the human being, a fracturing of the human being, the body and the soul. It's not supposed to be this way. God created us to live on earth and never die. We die because of sin. Something's wrong. We know something's wrong. It's not supposed to be this way. We're not supposed to die, but we die because we sin. So death rips the soul and the body because humans are broken. Now, a high view of the human body is also Jesus came to earth in what? Did he come to earth as an angel? In an angel's body? No. He came to earth in a human body. He must have held the human body at a high value. He put on flesh and blood. He ate food. He walked on earth. He slept. Jesus even wept. And have you ever wondered why Jesus wept at the death of his friend, at the graveside of his friend, when he was just going to raise him from the dead and a few minutes later? It makes me tingle a little bit why Jesus would weep. Because he knew that it was caused by sin. And it's not supposed to be this way. It's not God's original design for us to die. We're supposed to have eternal bodies, if you want to think of it that way. That's at least how I look at it. However, there is something interesting about Jesus. This picture kind of illustrates it. He rose from the dead. This is something very unique within Christianity, the resurrection. Jesus' resurrection, he was resurrected with a new body. But interestingly about this new body, he still had the old scars. Someone said the only man-made thing in heaven will be the scars on Jesus. Isn't that crazy? He still had the scars. He had interesting abilities. He could walk through walls. So this new body has these abilities that we don't comprehend. But he still had some sort of body. How it works, I don't know. No one knows. It's just as that's how it is. In fact, the early church buried because Jesus was buried. They buried the dead because Jesus was buried. Respecting the body for the hope of the resurrection. Opposed to the pagan cultures, which would cremate the bodies of the people, which was very disrespectful, they thought. Tertullian An early church father said church funds were used to support and bury poor people. Acacius, another church father, said this: the last and greatest office of godliness is to bury the burying of strangers and the poor. That's interesting. They took the body so seriously. They took it. They valued it so much. N.T. Wright has a famous quote that says, life after death. That's N.T. quotes, saying that we have life, but life after death, meaning that after our life, after we die, because we're still alive after we die, but there's going to be a resurrection, later resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 says this, but if there be no resurrection of the dead, then is Christ not risen? If Christ be not risen, then our preaching is vain, and your faith is also vain. If there's no resurrection, if you will not have a resurrected body as a believer in Christ, after the last trump and all that stuff, our faith is in vain. Corinthians goes on to say this, Paul in Corinthians says this, but now is Christ risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that sleep, for he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed, for this incorruption must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? John says the same thing. There shall be no more death. Behold, I will make all things new. Romans says the same thing. New creation. The creation groaneth. They're waiting for the redemption of the body. Philippians says the same thing. I may know him, the power of the resurrection. I may attain to the resurrection of the dead, says Paul. Who still change our vital body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working of our body, is able even to do all things unto himself. God is still God. And as a Christian, someday you will have a resurrected body.
Yes.
The body is God. Don't let anybody say that you're not God.
Amen.
All right, quickly, just wrapping up here. I have a new book out, just so you know. Some feedback on that you can read up here if you want. Go back to my table afterwards, after everything is done with the two talks and everything else. There's another friend of mine actually, he got it. Very interesting guy. Interesting. So grab your copy today. Talk to me back there. I also have a digital copy as well, Kindle, stuff like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Daniel, for that wonderful lecture. So let's give him another big hand. Mr. John, can you give us another number as we prepare for this? Remembering Pastor Carl Kelly. Good to see Sister Nita. She's so short, I just walked by and didn't even see her. Good to see you, Sister. God bless you. Her pastor's here also, Pastor Dwayne, Dr. Dwayne Walker and wife. Good to have him here at the Expo as well. Amen. All right, Mr. John O'Brien, we prepare for presentation.
Amen. Well, Lord's good.
About a month ago or so, Mom got diagnosed with COVID. And I didn't think much of it because, I feel like there's, discrepancies amongst at least some of the preachers I know and everything. Not to say that it's not real, it's very real. And long story short, it got pretty bad. She went to the hospital, I think, within 6 days of being diagnosed, and I think she got all the way up to 55 liters of oxygen. And if any of you know loved ones, friends that had to deal with anything like that, it for a minute there got pretty scary. And I just remember my mom. I obviously she was very discouraged at first, but there was a point, I think she was in the hospital 17 days. There was a point where I remember, and I'm telling you, I'm very strong, but when you talk about your mama, I was an emotional mess. Whenever I get off the phone with her, I didn't want her to know. And so I just remember talking to her, and she had, I don't know what the Lord did, just came into her spirit and gave her such peace that he had the situation. And this is a song of good fellow that I know, and every time I think of it, every time I sing it, I think about my mom. If any of you have ever been through a tough time, there's always a reason for it. And I believe it's to give God the glory.
The pain that you feel seems will never end, but this is the will of God. Seems so hard to comprehend that God has chosen you to suffer in this way, so that He will get the glory as you go from day to day. He may not send His healing now, but He'll give you the grace sufficient to stand the trial that you will face. You may weep all night long, but joy comes in its place. While you wait for His healing, God gives you His grace. There are so many lives looking out on their way. Now they're watching you to see how you're going to live from day to day. Will you serve God for not them saying as they look you in the face? Will they see the light in your eyes, revealing God's amazing grace? He may not send His healing now, but He'll give you the grace sufficient to stand the trial that you will face. You may weep all night long, but joy comes in its place. While you wait for His healing, God gives you His grace. You may weep all night long, but joy comes in its place. While you wait for His healing, while you wait for His healing, while you wait for the healing, God will give you His grace.
We've come to the hour that I want to remember a true soldier for the Lord Jesus Christ, Pastor Carl Lewis Kelly, and I want you to play that.
I don't have a pastor, I didn't get it. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll give you a few minutes.
Can we do that? Can we play it after?
Can we play that?
Right.
They need time to get it up.
Well, okay, go ahead and do it. So
I don't have, we can't play, we can't play the system.
Oh, okay. All right, then we'll do this afterwards. I thought I was ready to go. But come on up, David. So, and we're going to ask Sister Nita Kelly to come. We got something we're going to play here shortly. I wanted to lead into this, but we just have to do what we have to do. Come, Sister Nita Kelly, please. And Sister Pam Early will come. She's our new secretary. Our new secretary for Creation of this Expo. She replaced Sister Ellen Perrin as our new CE secretary. Yeah. And we're going to start off with a proclamation from Creation Evidence Expo.
Proclamation honoring the life and service of Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly. Whereas Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly gave his heart and life to Christ at an early age and spent his adult life pursuing and teaching God's truth, and whereas Reverend Kelly poured out his heart and soul into the ministry, teaching that there should be truth in education in our public schools, and whereas Reverend Kelly was a devoted husband to his dear wife, Anita Kelly, and a loving father and grandfather, and whereas Reverend Kelly eagerly joined the Creation Evidence Expo team in 2009 and quickly became a vital contributor in the task of proclaiming Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And whereas Reverend Kelly endeared himself to the entire Creation Evidence Expo team as a member of the board, travel companion of Dr. Frederick W. Boyd Jr., volunteer at countless events, and tireless worker willingly helping us needed. And whereas Reverend Carl Kelly became a spokesman for the Creation Evidence Expo after state legislature stopped the violence rallies and expos on the road in dozens of churches throughout Indiana and around our country, during which he always questioned, what's wrong with the truth? To emphasize the prevalence of error in education and public life. And whereas Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly is both a friend and brother, greatly appreciated by so many persons, now be it known to all that the Creation Evidence Expo family grieves the untimely passing of this great man. With grateful hearts for the sacrificial service he rendered to our Lord and the ministry, we hereby declare Saturday, September 11th, 2021 as the Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly Day at the annual Creation Evidence Expo. Dr. Frederick W. Boyd Jr., Senior Executive Director of the Creation Evidence Expo.
And now we're going to show something real quick here.
No, not yet. We need to talk about because of the indoctrination that our children are receiving from the evolutionary plan. Secular humanists try to explain our existence without God, has indoctrinated our children with a lie. And in my research in the last 6 years, I found out that there is absolutely no law, regulation, or ordinance that requires that what's taught in our educational system has to pass any definition of truth. The very thing that your preachers and pastors are telling you every Sunday morning is being called a lie in our educational system. They have roughly 30 to 35 hours a week that they're indoctrinating our children with the lie of evolution. And we only get about maybe 2 to 3 hours max. We have to show by the evidence of science that there is a creator. There's absolutely no evidence that a one-cell creature evolved into a two-cell creature. But that's put forward as truth of how we are in existence today, that we came from the primordial ooze to the multifaceted Homo sapien. The reality is there's no evidence of it whatsoever. However, with creation, there's science in the Bible, there's science that coordinates with the Bible, and there's science outside of the Bible example that shows that we had to have someone who designed this, and that someone is God. And Creation Evidence Expo is here to expose that. This is something we need to establish in order to contradict the indoctrination of evolution in our schools. We must be able to debate, we must be able to openly discuss and challenge the information, which is not allowed today in our education system. Truth in education is bringing all these things together where we can show critical analysis of the evidence as it's put forward to us, question it, investigate it, verify it on our own. All of this will help us to counter the indoctrination of evolution by saying we simply want truth to be the basic component of our education process. You can find us on Facebook, and we have a website, creationevidenceexpo.org.
That's it. That was Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly. Let's give God a hand up praise. Our senior program has a gift to present to Sister Kelly as well. This is the Senior Executive Director proclamation and award that we give to those special people in this ministry. This is the 8th one, Pastor Carl Kelly. And he can read that because
This is the crystal globe that we traditionally have given away to families that we honor at our expo. The base says, CEE remembers Pastor Carl Lewis Kelly, a champion for truth in education. Live on. And it's a globe, crystal globe. Present that to you.
come here, daughter. Come here, daughter. You come and let your husband do that. You come take this for your mom. And we ain't done yet. We ain't done. We ain't done. We know. We got some, our executive, our new assistant executive director has a financial contribution to make at this time to you, Sister Kelly, from Currier of this Expo.
No big speech. Your husband was amazing, and we all had a chance to write the book. Kind of what we had to say. And I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, look at the midst of the expo, and you saw Carl Kelly up there. This gentleman, at the end of the day, he didn't care. He saw through exactly what we're here about, right? He saw through the things in the world that would keep people from talking to each other. And he could see past those layers and the onions, and people might make it about race or whatever. He could see right past it. He had such just a heart for, as he said up there, it's powerful. Education, truth. And he, I know for a fact, he was down at the legislature of the state like almost every year, right? Fighting for, hey, why can't we teach the truth or the theory of creation along with the theory of evolution in our schools? He fought for that every year. Amazing man. Amazing man.
We don't announce the amount, but buy a few dinners down the road. So, and another person gave a contribution too. So God bless you, Anita. We love you, and whatever we can do is this ministry.
Love you. Love you. Amen. Preach good. That's good. Amen.
Well, you take a look at that.
Can I go now?
Yeah.
Can't hold me any longer. Forgive me, I don't do public speaking. Verse 2, right now, first, heard my husband say, hearing. But first giving honor to God, who is my life, who was my husband's life. On this day, September 11th, is the day my husband went to glory. And on September 11th, those that died in Twin Towers. This is a day the Lord made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it. I know that is the truth. But this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Even when I ziplined into the ribbons last year, this is the hardest. I just want to say, forgive me because it's pretty tiny. That's not it, that's for Macy's. Okay. I want to thank each and every one of you for recognizing and appreciating and acknowledging my husband's call. And his dedication to the CEP Creation Evidence Expo. He loved sharing the evidence for creation. He loved it. Anyone that would just give him a minute, just listen. And if he had your attention, trust and believe, he will talk about the fossil record, the decay of Earth's magnetic field, and much more. He has such a love for the divine certainty by Dr. Wile. In the many stories of Dr. Dye, I wish he had gotten him out there. He deserved those degrees. He deserved them. He deserved them. He wanted so much to visit. No land. He finally got that opportunity to be able to go. One of my daughters, his daughter. But he said, sugar, I can't go. These old bones won't let me do. I wanted to go too because I wanted to ride a camel. I really did. And dig up some fossil clothes. I really did. Maybe one day I'll make it for both of us. He literally loved being the valuable part of the Creation Evidence Expo. I just wanted to express my thanks and gratitude. Again, first giving honor to God. Thank you, Pastor Walker, Lady Walker, Phyllis Temple, CEP Church, my pastor, his pastor. I thank you, my family. I thank each and every one of you for being here with me. My name is started to go. But I thank God she's here, spirit with me. Thank you, Pastor Boyd, for taking the signs out of the garage. If you could see it, you would believe what I did the last couple of days. Larry, thank you for climbing up on top of the roof, taking down those branches that become trees. You guys you for honoring the Reverend Carl Lewis Kelly Sr., who has transitioned from Waverly to reward. To God be the glory. And I just want to say one last thing, please bear with me. You have to see it. It's Philippians 4:7. I just love it. And I learned it from Dr. Walker. And I understand. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing. But in everything, by prayer, supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known unto God. And here's what I love best. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. May God be the glory. God bless each and every one of you. And I know Kelly is looking down at me. Yes, I call you Kelly because I can't say Carl. The C-A word, I just can't say it good. But I know he said, I finally got her to get up and say something. And
before you finish, we have a book that was designed, and we got a lot of good friends that written you some special, when you get kind of lonely and down now, just open this thing up and read some of the expressions that we have. Did you get a chance to check it? Well, who give them a chance to say something? Well, we'll give it to you before you leave tonight. That's your friends, Carl, expressing ourselves to you. Let's give it Let's give again on Carl Kelly night a tremendous hand for the work he did 13 years. He was asking the question, what's wrong with the truth? And a lot of times I was at the State House with him, we were arguing. Let's go back to giving the truth. And he gave a definition of truth. So we thank God for the life of Carl Lewis Kelly. We miss him, but he don't miss us. Another big hand.
Brother Kelly is missed, and he will continue to be missed from our entire organization. But he will never be forgotten either, because he left an indelible mark on our ministry, on Creation Evidence Expo, and on us as individuals as well. So thank you, Sister Anita, for being here, and the entire family. Thank you so much, and blessings to you. And know that you are very well loved by us all.
And if you need us, call us, okay?
Yes.
You're part of the family of Creation Evidence Expo.
We're going to now get started with our second lecture, but right before we do that, please stand up. Everybody stand up. Just
stand up.
An opportunity to stretch and be prepared to just get readjusted and blood flow just slightly more so that we can listen to another fine lecture. This gentleman came to us several years ago. He is brilliant. He is a tremendous speaker. He will hold your attention. He's extremely entertaining. We are so grateful to have Dr. Wile with us. When he came, we just realized instantaneously what a great man and teacher he was. Tonight, Dr. J. Wile is going to talk to us why this scientist believes in a young earth. That is something that is desperately needed for us here tonight. So you can be seated, and Dr. J. Wile, please bless us with the truth.
Okay, here we go. Oh, I haven't turned on the mic yet. Get that going. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here again, every year. Wonderful to be here. Before I delve into the talk, our dear sister did mention it, but we do have to remember today was a very important day 20 years ago. I was flying internationally and got grounded in San Juan for 4 days and in Dallas for a day because of what happened on 9/11. But the real personal thing was my daughter knew that we were coming home on an American Airlines flight out of Dallas. What she heard on the news was there was an American Airlines flight out of Dulles that crashed into the Pentagon. She thought that was on a plane. And it took almost an hour that I was constantly calling before we could get through because all the phone lines in San Juan was bad. And so for about an hour, she really thought we were dead. And so when she answered the phone and I said, "Hi, sweetie," she broke down. And I thought to myself later, she was very happy that we weren't, dead. But nearly 3,000 other people, they learned that their family member did die. That's just incredible. So anyway, we can't forget that. Okay. So when it comes to the age of the earth, and young earth, old earth, let me start with a small confession. Ever since graduate school, I have been very skeptical of the idea that the earth is ancient. By the time I went to college, I was a Christian, but I was more than happy to believe that the earth was billions of years old, like all my teachers told me, because they're smart, I'm not, so therefore, they must be right. But as I started learning more and more science, I started questioning this whole idea, and one reason was because as a chemist, as Dr. Eames will tell you, one thing we have to really, really be careful of is we have to make sure that whatever we state scientifically can be supported by the data. And oftentimes we go a little too far, a little more than the data allow. And let me give you an illustration of what I mean. Let's suppose I have two hydrogen atoms, and I put them kind of close together, and I measure the energy between them. Now, don't worry about why I do this. Just realize chemists do crazy things, and one crazy thing we do is we stuff atoms together, and we measure the energy between them, right? So I take these two atoms, I move them a little closer, I measure the energy, I move them a little closer, I measure the energy. I got 3 data points there that all say the energy is essentially 0. So if I was kind of a lazy scientist, I could say, well, no matter how close those atoms get together, the energy will always be 0. But maybe I want to be a little more careful. So I'll say, okay, 3 data points aren't a lot of data points, so let's start moving these atoms even closer together. When I do that, I suddenly see that the energy starts going down as they get closer and closer together. And so now I've got lots of data points. I can't even tell you how many I got there. Lots and lots of data points. It's really clear what's happening now, right? We now know that the energy is just getting lower and lower the closer these atoms get. So let's just say, no matter, if I keep shoving them closer and closer and closer together, the energy is just going to go down, 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 down. Right? That's a completely valid conclusion based on the data, right? Problem is, if we actually do the rest of the experiment and measure the energy, we find out that's not true either. Because once they get really close together, they start to repel. And then the energy goes sky high. And it turns out the way these two hydrogen atoms make a hydrogen molecule is they get close enough so that the energy is at its lowest value. And that's where those two atoms decide to sit together to make a hydrogen atom, or to make a hydrogen molecule. Now, my point is, if I had stopped there, I would have made the wrong conclusion, right? I had lots of data to back me up, but nevertheless, I made the wrong conclusion. Why? Because I did something irresponsible. I made what's called an irresponsible extrapolation. I took a few data points, figured out a pattern, and said that pattern must go on forever. Now, extrapolation can be very useful in science, because sometimes there are things we can't measure. So we measure as much as we can, and then we extrapolate the rest of the way. But a careful scientist always makes sure that the range over which we're extrapolating is small compared to the range of data we have. So if I've got this much data, I can extrapolate maybe this far, much farther. But if I have this much data, I can't extrapolate this much farther. The thing is, if you want to believe in an ancient earth, that's exactly what you have to do. We've been measuring most of the things that scientists use to conclude the earth is ancient for maybe 100 years. And we have to now extrapolate those things over billions of years. That's exactly the opposite of what a careful scientist should do. And when I took analytical chemistry in college, I started thinking this doesn't add up. Because in analytical chemistry, I'm told extrapolation ranges have to be small. But in fact, to get to an ancient earth, you have to make your extrapolation range ridiculously long. So even though I didn't know a lot of the science, I started really being skeptical of an ancient earth because responsible scientists shouldn't make that kind of extrapolation. And to this day, I'm always flabbergasted over people who think, scientists, who think we know the earth is ancient, who think we have all this science to back up the earth is ancient, because in fact, the very things we need to do to think that the earth is ancient is bad science. And so I've always been skeptical of it. So after a while, after I had some time to actually start doing some research, and actually after I actually started working with people who do reevaluating dating, I started really questioning this idea that the earth is really old. But nevertheless, we want to try and figure out something about the age of the earth. So when I look at how the data we use to try and figure out the age of the earth, I find the most reliable data indicate the earth is pretty young. So for example, one of the most reliable ways we can date something is called dendrochronology. That's the $20 word for counting tree rings, right? Cut a tree, look at its rings, tree forms a ring every year, you count the rings, you know how old the tree is. Turns out you don't actually have to cut the tree down to do this. Trees are ridiculously incredible organisms. They're not like people. I could drill a hole straight through a tree. And as long as I plug up both ends, the tree's going to survive. You know, you can do that maybe here on a human, but you certainly can't do it here. You can put that hole straight through the middle of the tree, no problem. So we can actually dig out a core, a little column of the tree, and count rings without actually cutting down the tree. And that's how most living trees are dated these days. Now, we do know that there are situations under which a tree can form more than one ring a year. I think the record is 5 rings a year. But it has to be pretty unusual conditions for that to happen. Generally speaking, trees form one ring a year. The very, very accurate way of dating things. Well, if I look at the oldest living tree, once again, we don't have to cut down the tree to do this. We find that it has 4,790 rings. It's called Methuselah, and believe it or not, it's a state secret as to where this tree is. We know what national park it's in, but the actual location is a state secret. Because you know, if people knew, they'd be coming taking chunks out of the tree to take home, you know? So we don't let people know that, right? So the thing about this isn't a sequoia tree. It's not one of these big trees that everybody thinks of. It's actually a kind of a bushy tree called a bristlecone pine. These are bristlecone pines here, and these are the oldest known trees. There's no known time limit, no known age limit for these trees. And as a matter of fact, according to the people who actually know where this tree is and examine it, this tree seems just as healthy as the young 1,000-year-old trees that are right next to it. So it's showing no signs of aging or dying of old age. And we don't know how old bristlecone pines can be because the oldest one we have seems to be pretty darn healthy right now. Now here's the thing. If you want to believe in an ancient earth, you have to believe that bristlecone pines have been around for a couple 100 million years. And even though they've been around for a couple 100 million years, the oldest one is less than 5,000 years old. And remember, trees can't form more than one ring a year, so this is actually an upper limit. This tree is probably a little younger than 4,790 years old. That's probably an upper limit. Now, if you believe in the Bible and you believe there was a worldwide flood that probably would have destroyed all the trees, that worldwide flood happened about 4,500 years ago. Given the fact that this is an upper limit, that's really consistent with the idea that there was a worldwide tree-killing flood that occurred about 4,500 years ago. Now, once again, there are lots of different ways you can try and date something, but of all the ways, counting tree rings seems to be the most reliable. And that most reliable method tells us that at least Brazil pines haven't been here very long, even though there doesn't seem to be an age limit, at least one we know of. So, in that case, at least trees, they look really young. The Earth's magnetic field looks very young. Reverend Carl Kelly used to talk about this all the time. We know that the Earth has a magnetic field, makes the compass point north. We navigate with it. Animals navigate with it. Most animals that migrate have a built-in compass in their brain, so they can get a reading of which way is north. As far as we can tell, the way salmon know which stream to go to reproduce is because they're looking at very, very small variations in the magnetic field that pinpoint the precise stream that they need to swim up. So the magnetic field is important for navigation for people. It's also important for navigation for certain animals. A few things we know is we started measuring it in earnest in the late 1800s, and since 1890, it has been decaying. We've never seen it rise, but since 1890, when we really started measuring this stuff seriously, the magnetic field of the Earth is getting weaker. During times of the past, it does seem to have reversed, because if we look at naturally magnetic things in certain volcanic rocks, we see that sometimes they're pointed one way, other times they're pointed exactly the opposite way. And the easiest way to understand that is that the magnetic field reversed. So sometimes during the past, the compass needle would point south and not north. Also, if we look at the planets around us, or in the solar system, some planets have one, some planets don't. Now, of course, since there's this really important thing called the magnetic field, scientists want to know what made it, why is it there, that sort of thing. We think we understand that part anyway. If we look at the Earth, and even though this is amazing what science can do, even though we have never been able to dig through the Earth's crust, which is the thin layer of rock that's on top of the Earth, we haven't even gotten down to the next layer of rock, which is called the mantle, and we haven't gotten to the outer core, we haven't gotten to the inner core. But when we watch how earthquake waves travel around the world, we can actually map out what's inside the world. It's truly remarkable. Anyway, we know that there's this area called the mantle, which has got a rock that's that behaves a lot like oobleck. If you've ever played with that starchy oobleck thing, it gets harder the harder you push on it. That's what the mantle behaves like. The outer core is hot liquid. The inner core is hot solid. We think that there are electric currents in the outer core. And we think there's particular types of motion that develop that cause these electric currents. And these electric currents, when they move, form a magnetic field. So the Earth is one big electromagnet, as far as we can tell. And everybody pretty much agrees on that. However, how this magnetic field came to be is a bit of a dispute, depending on who you're talking with. So, there are basically two theories out there. One's based on young Earth ideas. And it assumes the Earth is significantly less than 10,000 years old. It's also called the rapid decay theory, so if you look this up, it might be called the rapid decay theory. And it says these electric currents are the result of specific processes by which God made the Earth. And these specific processes are laid out in the theory. It gets a little technical, I don't want to get bogged down in the details. But the New Testament tells us that the Earth was made of water and by water. And if you make certain assumptions about what that water was like, you end up being able to understand where these electric currents come from. So that's the young Earth view, based on Scripture. There's an old Earth view, also called the dynamo theory, that the currents in the core are the result of the motion on the Earth as it spins on its axis and other convective effects that are occurring. And once again, it's way too detailed to get bogged down in that. The key here is this. Both of these theories are very mathematical, and both of them can be used to make specific predictions about the strengths of these magnetic fields and how long they should last. All right? Now, the older theory, which is what I first learned, has a lot of problems. A lot of problems. First of all, it can't even correctly predict whether or not a planet should have a magnetic field. For example, Mars has no planetary magnetic field, but the dynamo theory says it should. And we don't, the dynamo theorists don't understand why. Mercury, when we first sent a robotic spacecraft to Mercury, they almost did not put a magnetic field sensing device on it because the dynamo theory said Mercury should not have a magnetic field. But it turns out these magnetometers are pretty cheap and pretty light, so they went ahead and put one on, and sure enough, despite the fact that the theory says it shouldn't, Mercury does have a planetary magnetic field. All of these, almost all scientific theories, have sort of what I call fudge factors. They're things we don't really know really clearly, so we just kind of have to guess at them. And if we use Earth to calibrate all those guesses, so we take all the fudge factors and we make them work for Earth, then the dynamo theory doesn't work for any of the other planets. It's either too strong or too weak, not there, should be there. Also, we know that the Moon and Mars currently don't have magnetic fields. However, the Moon and Mars, according to rock samples, had one at one time. So they don't have them now, but they did have them at one time, at least according to certain rock samples. The dynamo theory says, look, as long as your core is liquid, you should always have a magnetic field if you have one to begin with. So there's no way the dynamo theory can account for a planet or a moon losing its magnetic field. So in short, the dynamo theory is pretty bad, right? In contrast, the young Earth theory works really, really well. Really well. For example, it correctly predicts whether or not each planet has or has not a magnetic field. It's right on every planet. Furthermore, once again, there are fudge factors involved. So if you use the Earth to fix all those fudge factors and get the theory working for Earth, then that theory is right on every other planet's magnetic field as well. What's really impressive about this is this theory was written in 1984. At that time, we did not know the magnetic fields of Neptune or Uranus. Hadn't been measured yet. But the rapid decay guy, the guy who made this model, Russell Humphrey, said, if we ever get around to measuring these values, here's what they should be. A few years later, the Voyager spacecrafts each measured one, and they were exactly what the rapid decay theory predicted. Now, to me, that's pretty amazing. And this is, in fact, what separates a scientific theory from a non-scientific theory. A lot of people have different ideas of what makes this theory scientific. From a scientist's point of view, here it is. If a theory can make a testable prediction about something that isn't known, it's scientific. And furthermore, if that prediction is then confirmed by the data, it's probably correct. Well, this theory's done more than this, but this theory has done it at least twice. Because it made two predictions about two things that were not known. And when those things were measured, they were exactly what the theory predicted. That's pretty impressive. But it gets even better. Remember, Moon and Mars currently have no planetary magnetic fields, but rocks indicated they used to. Now, this was known about the Moon when the guy wrote the theory in 1984, but this was not known about Mars. It wasn't known until the late 90s that Mars at one time had a planetary magnetic field. So that's another prediction. It said, look, Mars should have had a planetary magnetic field at one time. Almost 15 years later, we figured out it did. And then this is the most impressive. Remember, they almost didn't put a magnetometer on the robotic spacecraft that measured, that went to Mercury because they didn't think Mercury had a magnetic field. Well, they ended up putting one on, and they ended up measuring that it had a magnetic field. That was back in 1975. We sent a robotic spacecraft to Mercury. Well, we sent one back in 2008. Now, according to the dynamo theory, magnetic field should be the same, because there hasn't been enough time for any significant change to happen. According to the rapid decay theory, it should have decayed by about 6%. Guess what? When we got there in 2000, we actually didn't get there until 2010, when the robotic spacecraft got there, it had weakened. It only weakened by 4%, not 6%, but still it had weakened, which is something the dynamo theory didn't predict at all, but the young Earth theory did. So, to me, the Earth's magnetic field looks young. At least it seems to be young from the available evidence. Also, when we put the Earth and the Sun together, it looks very, very young. Because based on everything, we haven't visited the Sun, so we can't be 100% sure. But we think we understand how the sun works. We think we understand everything. It basically fuses lighter elements, predominantly hydrogen, into heavier elements, predominantly helium. And that's what we're trying to do these days to make clean energy. We're trying to do nuclear fusion. You may have heard in the news that another milestone was made in nuclear fusion, and that's true. There was another milestone made. We're probably now only about 60 years out from getting fusion energy. But the sun's always been doing it as far as we can tell. It's been fusing hydrogen mostly into helium mostly, and when that fusion occurs, energy is released. Well, what's really interesting about this is sort of the opposite of a fire. If I start burning wood, the fire gets really hot, and then what does it do? It dies away as it runs out of fuel. When nuclear fusion happens and the light and hydrogen fuses into helium, the sun actually gets more compact, which makes the fusion faster. So the sun actually gets hotter the older it is. Now it'll eventually die out as well, but it has to get all the way up to iron, really, which is a long way away. So right now, based on what it's doing, fusing hydrogen into helium, then in the end, the sun is actually getting hotter. And with really delicate measurements, we've been actually able to confirm that. Very, very small changes, because we haven't been measuring it for that long. But based on the very small changes, they're consistent with the theory that in the end, the sun should be getting hotter as time goes on. Now, this is a problem because if you play the tape backwards, what does that mean? In the past, the sun should be dimmer. Well, the sun is our source of energy. So what that means is as we go back in the past, the Earth is getting less energy. And according to Dr. David Solarbaum, who is an old earther, he says, according to standard solar models, at a billion years of age, so when the sun was only a billion years old, the sun had something like 75% of today's luminosity. And under those conditions, we would get the Earth freezing over, and it wouldn't recover because it would be a high albedo. What this means is, it's getting so little energy that all the water freezes. It's not warm enough to keep water liquid, so it all freezes. Ice is more reflective than water, so once you have a bunch of ice, it starts reflecting light back to the sun, so it gets even less energy. So the Earth becomes a snowball and stays a snowball forever, according to solar theories. That's why this is called the young faint sun problem. And so in the end, the Earth would look like this when the sun was a billion years old. And the thing is, when the sun was a billion years old, that's when life was supposed to first appear. You're not going to have life appearing on a snowball. Not going to happen. So in the end, this tells us there's something wrong with this idea that the Earth and the sun have been around for 4.6 billion years old. Back in 2012, the Space Telescope Science Institute hosted a 2-day symposium about this problem. It was called The Faint Early Sun: Paradox, Problem, or Distraction. It was a 2-day event, and the conclusion was, this is a serious problem. Based on everything we know, we shouldn't be here if the Earth and the sun are around 4.6 billion years old. And that's a problem. It's a problem if we shouldn't be here. All right? There was no solution produced in this 2-day symposium, and a few proposed things were shown to be invalid. And in the end, this is still a problem. It's still a problem for anyone who wants to believe the Earth and sun are 4.6 billion years old, because in the end, the sun would have been too cold. The Earth would have been too cold. Life couldn't have happened. Right? So once again, the Earth and the sun, they look young. Now let's try and make it something a little more tangible than the Earth and the sun. Those are big things that are far apart from each other. We don't know very much about the sun. So what's a little more tangible? Well, I think the thing that sort of is the best icon of an old Earth is dinosaur bones, right? We all know the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So when I get a bone from a dinosaur, it's got to be at least 65 million years old. However, what we find is if we actually analyze these bones, they look incredibly young. Incredibly young. And there are two independent lines of evidence that tell us they're incredibly young. And the first is the one that's near and dear to my heart because it's right up my alley, my specialty. There is a significant amount of radioactive carbon in dinosaur bones. And this is a serious, serious problem if you want to believe these bones are even 1 million years old, much less, or even 100,000 years old, much less 65 million years old. Why? Because carbon-14 has a pretty short half-life. When things radioactively decay, they cut themselves in half over a particular amount of time, and that time is called a half-life. So if I had, say, 100 pounds of carbon-14, and I waited 5,700 years, roughly the length of this talk, right? If I waited that long, I wouldn't have 100 pounds anymore. I'd only have 50 pounds. And if I waited another 5,700 years, I'd only have 250 pounds. Every 5,700 years, the amount of carbon-14 gets cut in half. So carbon-14 never actually goes away because it keeps cutting itself in half. However, if you cut yourself in half enough, you get to be so small that you're not detectable anymore. And our best equipment can detect any radioactive atom over a course of 10 half-lives. After 10 half-lives, pretty much any radioactive atom becomes undetectable. So, if something has carbon-14 in it, it's got to be less than 60,000 years old. That's the bottom line. Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to find carbon-14 in it. Nevertheless, every dinosaur bone that has been measured has significant amounts of carbon-14. Now, we haven't known this for very long. Why? Because old earthers don't want to test dinosaur bones for carbon-14. Their excuse is, it wouldn't be worth it. We know there's nothing in there, right? But creationists are like, no, these bones are only thousands of years old. There are a lot of indetectable amounts of carbon-14. Well, eventually, creationists got enough money to start digging and finding fossilized dinosaur bones. So this is a young earth creationist cutting in to a Triceratops femur. And the reason he's cutting in is you want to look for the carbon-14 inside the bone. All sorts of crazy things happen on the outside of the bone. You got to get inside the bone to look for what's really there. So he's cutting into that bone so he can extract some samples and get them tested for carbon-14. So they've done this for 8 different sets of dinosaur fossils, multiple samples from each set. In every sample, a significant amount of carbon-14 has been found. In fact, the least amount of carbon-14 indicated that the fossil was only 39,000 years old. Now, I don't think that number is right, but my point is this. If that bone was 65 billion years old, there should be absolutely no carbon-14. So when you ask, what's the carbon-14 date, the answer should be, we can't tell, because we can't detect them. Every one of these dinosaur fossils had enough carbon-14 in it to detect and date, and all of them dated 39,000 years or younger. Now, like I said, I don't think that value is right, but what it tells me is they can't be millions of years old, because the carbon-14 would be gone, and it's not. Now, this is a really important point, because after all, we've been being told for years, don't test these dinosaur bones for carbon-14, there's not going to be any of them. Okay, now there's carbon-14 in it, we know that. So what do evolutionists do about it? Well, they stopped testing the dinosaur bones. Because you see these young earth creationists, they had enough money to dig for fossils and sample them and send them out. But they didn't have enough money to buy a particle accelerator, which is what you need to do this carbon-14 testing. So what you do is you take your samples and you send it to a carbon-14 testing lab. This lab makes its money by you sending them samples and paying them, right? When the lab read the scientific publication that these young earth creationists wrote, here's what they said in response. The scientists at CAIS, that's the facility that actually does the carbon-14 testing, and I are dismayed by the claims that you and your team have made with respect to the age of the earth and the validity of biological evolution. Consequently, we are no longer able to provide radiocarbon services in support of your anti-scientific agenda. Think about what these guys are saying. First of all, they're willing to give up money because this is how they make their living. But they're willing to give up money in this case because they don't want these data out there. But more importantly, they're calling the young earth creationists anti-scientific. Let me ask you a question. What's more anti-scientific? Wanting to do carbon-14 testing or refusing to do carbon-14 testing? Because even if you want to believe these fossils are 65 million years old, and I've got lots of colleagues who want to believe that, if you want to believe it, you better figure out why there's radiocarbon in there. You better figure out why there's carbon-14 in there. So you want to be doing even more tests. You should be more interested, someone who believes these are 65 million years old, they should be more interested in these tests than someone who doesn't. Because you got to do a lot of tests to figure out why something that shouldn't be in there is actually in there. But they're just stopping. That's it. You'll see in a moment, this is not all that uncommon. Okay, speaking of dinosaur fossils, here's the second line of evidence that indicates they're very, very young. There are lots of examples of soft tissue found in dinosaur fossils. The first one was found in 2005. It was discovered by accident. No one was looking for it, of course, because soft tissue shouldn't be in 65 million year old bones. But nevertheless, Mary Schweitzer found in a Tyrannosaurus rex femur that was supposed to be 65 million years old. Clearly soft tissue. The soft tissue was so soft it was actually elastic. Because she said if you grab this with 4 steps, you grab this with 4 steps and pull, this stretches, and when you release, it comes right back. And this isn't a dinosaur bone that's supposed to be 65 million years old. Right? Now, if this is some one-off thing, that's not a big deal. However, laboratory studies do say that soft tissue generally decays in about 50 weeks. Even the molecules that make them up, we have pretty good models of how these molecules behave. The models tell us that after 30,000 years into it, these molecules should have fallen apart. So this myosin and myoglobin, particularly those proteins, have a lifetime of 30,000 years. So even under the best of conditions, this stuff ought to go away in 30,000 years. But nevertheless, it's there in the dinosaur world. And once again, you might think, this is a one-off. But in order to try and figure things out, the guy who owns the museum that this fossil belongs to is Jack Horner. I don't know if you know him. He's sort of a famous guy. Some people say that the Harrison Ford guy, Indiana Jones, was modeled after Jack Horner because he did some sort of crazy things to get his samples. So anyway, he's a pretty famous paleontologist. A creationist group offered him $10,000 to have that tissue carbon dated. Because once again, shouldn't be any carbon-14 in there if it's 65 million years old. But if it's young, there ought to be carbon-14 in there. They were going to give his museum $10,000 just to be allowed to have that sample to test. And he specifically said he wouldn't do it because the spin that creationists can get off us is not going to help us. If you actually go to YouTube and just search Jack Horner and then what's the guy's name from KGov? KGov would be good enough. KGOV. They actually have a recording of the conversation. It's really quite incredible. Quite incredible. And this $10,000 was above and beyond the amount required to do the carbon-14 So the museum was going to get $10,000, was going to get a few other artifacts dated, and Jack Horner said no, because he didn't like the spin that we could get off of it. Right? Once again, old earthers refusing to do scientific tests, that happens a lot. It happens quite a bit. All right? Since then, lots of examples have been found. Lots and lots. The one I want to focus on, here's another one, supposed to be 65 million years old. It's a Triceratops horn. This is a full Triceratops skull. What they found was just one of the horns. They soaked the horn in weak acid. The weak acid will attack the minerals, but it won't attack anything organic. So it won't attack any tissue. It'll just attack the minerals that they have on. And after a month or so, soft strips of brown tissue were recovered, and they were flexible. If you've ever seen the documentary, Is Genesis History? One of the scenes in there is the guy actually stretching the tissue that was pulled from the Triceratops. It's an interesting documentary. I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a really interesting documentary. And that scene alone is worth seeing. He actually takes that 65 million year old tissue and just stretches it and lets it relax again. Really quite incredible. Well, anyway, this tissue could be anything. So they decided to look at it under an electron microscope. An electron microscope allows you to get really, really big. And here's what they saw. Now, if you didn't take high school biology for quite a while, you might not recognize these. These are bone cells. Bone cells have a very specific characteristic. They're ovals, they're longer than they are, so they're not circles, they're ovals. But more importantly, they have these little extensions. We call them filopodial extensions. And these extensions actually allow those bone cells to communicate with one another so that they can adjust to the body's needs. And so when they looked at this stuff under the microscope, they found these bone cells, which is exactly what you'd expect to find in bone tissue. Now these cells are dead, but they are not fossilized in any way. In the peer-reviewed publication that this was published in, the author said that filopodial extensions, these little guys, were delicate and showed no evidence of any permineralization or crystallization artifact, and therefore were interpreted to be soft. So these are dead cells that haven't fossilized, yet haven't decayed. And if you want to believe this is 65 million years old, you got to figure out a way to keep those cells dead but not decaying for 65 million years. And please understand that little black bar there, that tells you the scale. The length of that black bar is 20 millionths of a meter. Each one of these little filopodial extensions is significantly less than a millionth of a meter wide, and yet hasn't decayed away and hasn't fossilized. I don't see how that could happen in 65 million years. I can see how it happened in a few thousand years, not 65 million years. That horn, the rest of the part of it that was soft tissue, was carbon dated, and once again, there was enough carbon-14 in it to show that it was probably 41,000 years old. Now, once again, I don't think carbon-14 dating works either, but if it was 65 million years old, they should have been able to get this number at all, because there should have been any carbon-14 there at all. Now, how did evolutionists respond to this incredible thing? Well, the university fired him. Once he published his paper, the principal investigator, Mark Armitage, was fired from his university position. In fact, in the lawsuit that followed, it was stated that after the paper was published, a university official stormed into his office and shouted, "We are not going to tolerate your religion in this department." That's probably what caused him, the university to settle out of court. Was that statement there. Now, I've actually talked to Mark Armitage. Very interesting fellow. He is a wizard with a microscope. Microscopy sometimes has to become an art in order to be really good, and he is a true artist when it comes to microscopes. And anyway, he said it wasn't the paper that got him fired. The paper was okay. They were willing to have somebody who said soft dinosaur cells. However, when the paper was published, students found out that their microscope lab had soft dinosaur cells. So he said regularly, every day, there'd be 4 or 5 students come down and want to see the dinosaur cells. Because it is cool, right? It's cool to have dinosaur cells. And he thought, and he said, the biology department got so furious that these students were interested in the soft dinosaur cells. That's what got him fired. And once he was fired, there was no one to show these kids the soft dinosaur cells anymore. And he said that's probably what got him fired. Anyway, the settlement was done out of court and so forth, so we don't know how much was settled, but he was able to use the money from the settlement to continue his research. And since then, he's done some incredible things. So for example, in this picture here, this scanning electron microscope picture, the cells are still attached to the bone. They're still there, part of the bone. Since then, he's actually been able to pull them out. And so this here is a single triceratops cell. Single triceratops bone cell just floating in water. And if his website is the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. He has a video of him grabbing cell with microforceps and just flipping it back and forth, and you just see it flopping around. Because it really is soft. So he's isolated several individual cells. What's cool about that is, you know what that is right there? Right there, that little dark circle. That's the cell's nucleus. You know what's in the nucleus, don't you? DNA. Now, it takes a lot of DNA for us to be able to analyze it. So a single cell is not enough. But the hope is, you get enough cells, you get enough DNA, you can actually start analyzing the dinosaur DNA. That would be pretty cool. But he's also found other stuff too. He's found the portions of nerve cells. Nerve cells can be really long. There's a cell body, and then there's a long strip of cell that goes to the next nerve cell. It's called the axon. That axon is just part of the cell. These axons are wrapped in a fatty fiber called the myelin sheath, and that's what this is. This looks like it can be a lot of things, but to anybody who knows anatomy, these little markings here show that this is something that's being wrapped in a fatty tissue. And it's exactly the right size and everything to be a nerve axon. So this is a nerve axon from a dinosaur. And once again, it's still soft. Here's the most amazing thing, though. Why in the world? It's hidden. Let me see if I can get it here. I don't know what happened here. I've got a really nice. Okay. There it is. Oh. When I did that turn off everything? Yeah, I should. I'll just second. I just want to make sure. So if I start the slideshow from here, what do I see on my side? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's coming back. All right. Here we go. This is a blood vessel. These are the red blood cells in the blood of the dinosaur. Once again, not fossilized, not decayed. Truly incredible. And it's not surprising that it's a young Earth creationist that's doing this. Because in the end, we're the ones who are really inquisitive about these dinosaur fossils. The old Earthers want to stop the tests. The young Earthers want to do more. We've done more. We've seen a lot of cool stuff. So anyway, he's still doing stuff. Like I said, he has a website called the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. Very, very interesting. All right, so why does this scientist believe in the young Earth? Really, most of Earth's features are best understood if they're only thousands of years old. The Earth really does look young. And really, when I look at nature, I generally see things that are best understood as having been around for a few thousand years, not much more than that. It's the safest view for a careful scientist. If there were no data on either side, a scientist would have to be a young earther because that involves no bad extrapolation. Right? Old earthers require huge extrapolations, which are not careful science. So it's the safest view for a careful scientist. And there are some things, and in the question and answer session, if you want, I can give you some. There are some evidences that make the Earth look old, but these are generally contradictory, and they're generally about things we don't understand very well. So some aspects of radioactivity make the Earth look really old, but we don't understand radioactivity very well. It's still throwing us surprises. So most likely, the reason it makes the Earth look really old is we don't understand it very well. But the fact is, the vast majority of the stuff I see in nature is most consistent with the Earth being thousands of years old. Okay, that's all I've got. Hopefully I'm going to have some questions, aren't we? Do we not have time? Let's see here. Oh. Okay. Well, feel free to talk to me afterwards. Yes.
We have to, because tomorrow this Sunday, and they will be having services here. We have to tear everything down out of the foyer and put it back in place and get it, packed away. In order to do that, get out of here in a timely fashion, we have to not have question and answer tonight. Tomorrow afternoon, we will be back to set everything back up again for tomorrow evening. So, because of the logistics of things, if you have questions, certainly talk to Brother Daniel or Dr. Wile on your own. They'll be here for a time afterwards. We don't want to short you, but we can't do it in a formal question and answer time. But we are going to do our giveaways tonight.
Don't leave yet, because you might win. Hey, David, where you at, David? All right, well, come on there. Come on, Curtis, help us tonight with this drawing. Cards. We're going to do this, and then we're going to dismiss you for the night. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock is our last official night. On Monday, we have the homeschool session, and that's just for homeschoolers. So I hope you can come tomorrow night, bring somebody. Let's close out in grand style tomorrow night. And the first gift we're going to have is from the 7 Baskets. It's a little grouping of stuff here. And the winner's going to be
Shelley Garrett.
Shelley Garrett. Here you go, Shelley. Is this your first time being here? Well, see, I always like it when I see these first timers come. That motivates you to come again. All right. All right, the next winner will be, and this is going to be Ruby Tuesday gift card for $25. And the winner is
Robert Flowers.
Robert Flowers. And he's from Grace Baptist Church in Muncie. And he took the challenge to come there twice. See what you get when you come? All right, Ruby Tuesdays. All right. Next one is a book, Beyond the Soil Christian by David and Beth Grant, and the winner is
Darlene Cosby. Darlene Cosby.
I think they were with the Kelly family. And she wanted me to remind everybody that Monday's his birthday, so we'll call him and say happy birthday to him, Carlos. All right.
Chad Garrett.
All right. This is you know than I am, but thank you. Is this your first time?
It's my first time.
Well, that's what you get for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Amen. Here's a book by Paul Chappell, First Steps of New Christians, and the winner is
Jonathan Ezel.
Jonathan Ezel. Very good, Jonathan. Good information there, Pastor Paul Chappell. The next one is a Bible Believer's Hat furnished by Dr. Willie, and the winner is
Anthony Bass. Anthony Bass.
He must have left us.
Next one here is Louise Gardner.
Louise Gardner.
Gordon.
Louise Gardner.
Oh, okay. Gordon.
Controversy of Dr. Willie, one of our presenters, and he's to give that hat to the Expo. Now, next one is One Blood, One Race, One Blood. This is written by Ken Ham and Dr. Charles Ware, and the winner is. This was from Answers to Genesis.
Oh, Warner Waters. Warner Waters.
Okay. We try again.
We gotta pick some winners here. Okay. Is that
Georgie from Kokomo.
Dr. Ken Ham and Dr. Charles Ware, which is one blood, one race, one blood. Is this your first? And is this your first time?
Second, I came from Bulgaria.
Okay. But have you been to this expo before?
Yes, last year.
Here at this event?
Yes.
Oh, last year, okay, all right, I missed the last year, okay. Well, thank you for coming back. The last one is the suit, $250 toward the new suit, and the winner is
Miriam Scott.
She's in the room with the baby. She's got a baby.
Very good. Very good.
You tell your wife, take you downtown and see Mina Taylor and have them work on, that's $250 towards the suit now. But it's a tailored suit of your choice. And I think that's it. We don't have any more giveaways for the night. We thank you from the depths of our heart for coming, being a part of creating this expo. And the final words is from our senior coordinator, Pastor Richard, for the night. And hope you come back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for the last session here.
Yes, tomorrow night, last session, and we're going to have a great time again next, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Tonight, be safe as you travel. There's out stuff, various books and other materials in the foyer out there. Please avail yourself of those materials. Stop at the tables. Please understand that we do need to exit relatively soon. We don't want to push you, but be respectful of our time. We have to get things torn down, and we really appreciate folks being efficient with their time. If you have questions for Brother Daniel, or you have questions for Dr. J. Wile, please ask them. They're available to do that, to answer your questions, and we want you to do that. Otherwise, you'll have a great, great night. Be blessed, and we'll see you back tomorrow.
Amen. Thank you. God bless you.